Hey again, it's Laura. I am going to read my story that I published in this book, Intersections, an Anthology of Poetry and Prose. This is a story that I worked on a whole bunch during a summer program at Oxford University in England several years ago. That was an amazing experience. And I had been working on this story before, but I revised it a lot during that time. And it is a little excerpt from my life. So here goes. It's called My Pick-Me-Up. I walked tiramisu along our downtown Salt Lake City neighborhood, my tired legs resisting the movement. The world was gray, even though it was summer. My heart was heavy and raw. I exhaled and dropped onto a grassy patch by the sidewalk, unwilling to take another step. Playtime, the Yorkie must have thought, because she bounded for my face and smothered it in kisses. There was no other creature in the world I would have let kiss me with such putrid breath, but I cherished her affection. I kissed tiramisu back, my bright pink lipstick leaving a perfect stamp on her forehead. When I saw the pink stain, a smile filled my face. We walked back to our small yellow brick apartment, tiramisu's hips swaying daintily. I watched her patter along, her sweet companionship, mine every day. My phone rang. The number on the line wasn't saved in my contacts list, but I knew it was my husband. Excitement filled my chest. I was never sure when I'd hear from Paul. Hello, I said. This is a prepaid call from an inmate at the Salt Lake County Jail. Press 1 to accept or 2 to report this call, the familiar recording instructed. I eagerly pressed 1 and unlocked the apartment door. As I waited to be connected, I nestled onto the couch, Tira cuddling up next to me. Hi, Paul said. His voice was warm and comforting. Hey, babe, how's it going? Good. Such was Paul's typical reply, whether he was headed home from work, going to the movies, or calling his wife while a line of prisoners waited their turn. Paul genuinely saw the world as good, which is one of the reasons I fell in love with him. He'd been through a lot of hardship before we met, but he was the happiest person I knew. Though we'd rather not be entrenched in a heavy legal battle based on false claims of abuse toward his own daughters, he always believed things would work out. How's Tira? He asked. So great. I can't wait for you to meet her. Tiramisu, Tira for short, got her name from the coffee and rum Italian dessert, which literally translated means a pick-me-up. I brought her into my life to comfort me during the court proceedings, which left me in a figurative prison, while Paul served literal jail time. It had been 3 months since he was arrested, and we endured the slow-moving legal train to determine a conviction or acquittal. Paul handled the circumstances with dignity and grace, while I struggled to carry on from day to day. The situation didn't fit with the vision of how my life would go, especially not for my first year of marriage. I treaded fear and anger, vacillating between fighting to stay afloat or letting go and sinking. Tira helped ease my burdens. She grew up in a puppy mill before being taken in by a hoarder with 13 other Yorkies. The hoarder had gotten the vocal cords on each dog removed. When I first brought Tira home, she quivered in fear and isolated herself. After several weeks, her fear toward me was replaced with a loving, playful side that filled my iPhone photo gallery. Despite her inability to bark, Tira communicated abundantly with her beard-framed smile and jaws that moved in silent excitement or protest. Her brown eyes were warm and constantly eager for a treat, a cuddle, or an outdoor adventure. Taking her into the mountains or on walks around the neighborhood was a healthy alternative to binging on chick flicks and gummy worms in my devastation. Paul had been locked up all summer with no set release date. Despite the pre-trial evaluator recommending his discharge, the judge refused. The ruling was no surprise given that Paul's ex-wife took the stand and cried that he was a danger to their daughters and the citizens of Salt Lake City. The 14-page report of his alleged offenses didn't help our case either. Instead, bail was set for $250,000. Paul was a college student and I was a teacher. Unsurprisingly, our bank account felt a little short. Well, good news, Paul said hesitantly, his voice quieting. I'm getting out. I swallowed. You really are? My tone was careful. I held my breath. We had anticipated Paul's release several times that summer. After each failed attempt, I had returned depressed and alone to the apartment I'd cleaned and the love notes I'd scattered for him. Yeah, my dad worked it out with the bondsman today. I got a notice about my release. When? Tonight. Tears escaped down my cheeks. Joyful, warm, silky tears that had held months of trauma and pain. A few days earlier, Paul had called his dad and said it was time to go home. My father-in-law must have known that if Paul, who had endured his jail sentence with resilience, said it was time, we needed to act. After a family council, we finally considered our last resort and hired a bondsman to pay Paul's bail. And this was a tough decision because the bondsman required a non-refundable 10% fee of the total bail, which for us was a painful $25,000. If we could have posted the bail, then the full amount would have been returned to us after the court proceedings, regardless of the verdict. Paul's parents paid beehive bail bonds, the down payment, and put a lien on their house until the $25,000 was paid in full. Paul and I added the remainder of the sum to what we already owed our attorneys and tried not to despair about our mounting debt. Several years earlier, when I was single, I'd met a friend of a friend who owned a bond shop. He said to call him if I ever found myself in a pickle. Okay, I had told him sarcastically, will do. At that point in my life, I didn't even know what a bail bondsman was, but it didn't sound good. Yet, there we were, paying a company a hefty price to free my husband. Though the pending court case continued to weigh heavily on my soul, having Paul home was a relief. The next hearing was Paul's last chance for acquittal before his case would go to trial. At that point, 12 random people would be forced into the most intimate details of our lives, joining a detective, a crime scene unit, and a prosecutor who were already there. The jury's responsibility would be to determine whether my 32-year-old husband would spend the rest of his life in prison or join me in rebuilding our lives. These strangers would decide if he was guilty or innocent, free or bound. Paul, Tira, and I forged on during the months we waited to determine our fate. At first, Paul didn't know what to make of the small wannabe yappy dog. Paul had always believed that little dogs were more rat than canine. Besides, Tira was afraid of everything but me, and he didn't know how to respond to her timidity. But Paul quickly grew to love Tira, and the joy she brought to my life soon brightened his too. He'd had nary a pillow, privilege, or privacy while incarcerated, yet few words of complaint had escaped his mouth. He deserved Tira's light. After only 7 months of unconditional love and generous kisses, Tira started throwing up and losing energy. Paul and I waited it out a week, hoping she'd only eaten something disagreeable. When she didn't recover, we took her to the vet and got medicine. After a few days of improvement, our hopes were high. Just when we'd stopped worrying, Tira's symptoms returned with a vengeance. An ominous feeling consumed me. Paul took Tira back to the vet for x-rays and blood work. He called me while my 5th graders were at recess. Hi, I said. As I paced the length of the chalkboard, I clung to the chance of good news. Hey, he said. Then nothing, as if his vocal cords were gone too. I waited, my hope evaporating in the silence. What did they say? I asked impatiently. Tira has a tumor, Paul said. There's nothing to be done. It's causing her lungs to fill up with fluid. They drained some of it, but she's only got hours left. My empty classroom closed in around me. His words, all spewed out at once, sounded like fiction. Too many words. I hated them all. I have to talk to you later. I hung up the phone, dazed, barely able to stand. Tears spilled down my face. I bent over and held the edge of my desk, trying to get a grip before the students returned. After all Paul and I had endured these past months, I truly believed we had earned ourselves a break from further hardships. How could we possibly handle any more loss? Not Tira, the girl with 100 nicknames like Tirami Fruzel, Tear Beer, and Tearbot. Not my antidepressant. Not the sweet-tempered terrier who I thought about and missed all day while teaching. Yet it was true. Tiramisu was dying. With that truth came a sense of grief and loss unique to the other varieties I'd endured. Students started barreling in from recess, excited chatter filling the room. It required significant effort to compose myself and teach social studies, the last class of the day. When 3 p.m. finally arrived, I excused the group of eager children. A few of the last students to leave noticed the irrepressible tears escaping down my face. "What's wrong?" Kim, a blonde beanpole with 2 short pants, asked me. Harper, a blue-eyed gymnast with pigtails, stood next to Kim, concern in her eyes. "Tira's dying," I said. "No," the girls cried, sorrow moving across their faces. They hugged me and stayed close. Staring at me with wide, moist eyes, they appeared as shocked as I felt. The next day, my desk was scattered with cards and a book of condolences made by 10-year-olds. Kim's mom told me that her daughter had come home that afternoon bawling because my dog was dying. Since the beginning of the school year, I spoke of Tira often and displayed pictures of her cuteness on my desk. My students even had pictures of her in their lockers from the Welcome to 5th grade postcard I'd mailed out before school started. Once alone to process the news, I sobbed in long, drawn-out waves, as though I were the one dying, not the one saying goodbye. These were different than the slow, quiet flow of tears when Paul was served with a protection order. The wild, bitter sobs after discovering the court believed the lies that created this nightmare. The hollow, suppressed tears when he was arrested. The breathless, coughing, soulless cries while Paul was locked up. Or the relieved, joyous tears when he came home. After all those experiences, I had borne such a vast range of suffering that I felt I could sympathize with almost anybody. Yet no one related to me, not even Paul with his unshakable optimism. Nobody I knew had experienced anything like what I was going through with Paul's accusations. Tiramisu helped me cope in a world where loneliness took on a whole new level. Anytime my friends spoke of their stress over decorating their homes or potty training their children, I felt increasingly disconnected and bit back harsh words. I'm pretty sure my facial expression said enough. While we navigated the drawn-out court case, I felt friend after friend pull away. Even some family members stopped trying to reach out. Colleagues at work either smothered me with good intentions or made themselves scarce. People had no idea how to handle me, my crusty visage, or what they knew about the situation. Losing Tira was an experience that placed me back into the relatable people category. Even those who didn't like pets or who had never lost one had compassion for the grief of losing something beloved. This outpouring of love restored my connection to humanity and taught me that life could be good again. We spent one last day and night with Tira, going for a walk in City Creek Canyon and feeding her brownie bites, Nutella, and Trader Joe's cookie butter for the first and last time. We let her sleep in our bed, an unprecedented privilege. As the night progressed, Tira's breath grew increasingly shallow. I touched her to make sure she was still breathing, and she cuddled her face against my hand, licking it with the tip of her tongue. The small gesture was all she could manage in her weakness. I would have locked myself in a room and listened to country music on repeat if it meant I could look forward to years of Tira's kisses. The knowledge that this would be one of her last shattered me. We took our little girl to the vet in the morning, where the professionals and Paul cared for her during her final moments. I waited in the car, grieving over our final goodbye. Nothing had been as painful as that last hug. When Paul came out 30 minutes later, he was carrying a 2x1 burgundy cardboard box. Did she suffer? I asked from my slumped position in the passenger seat. She was scared, so they sedated her first. Little tears slipped down Paul's face as we made eye contact. I nodded, a monsoon erupting down mine. She was all cuddly, Paul said. I'm glad I was there with her. So that's her body in there? I asked, referring to the box. Yeah. Paul left it at that and let me cry with my head resting against the window. Man, you guys are going to think I'm just like one big bald baby. I cry like 50 times in this story, and now. Now there were slobber marks on the back windows from Tira and tear marks on the front window from me. We drove to my parents' house and buried our sweet dog in their backyard. It was here Paul told me how, even sedated. Tira slightly bared her teeth when the doctor injected her leg for the last time. It reminded him of the line by Dylan Thomas, "Do not go gentle into that good night." Tira fought for her life, even until the very end. She wanted to stay with us. I studied a keepsake the vet had made for us. It was a quarter sheet of white cardstock with Tira's paw print stamped in purple paint. Underneath the image was a quote by Helen Keller: "What we once enjoyed and deeply loved, we can never lose. All that we love deeply becomes a part of us." We deeply loved and lost a relationship with Paul's daughters. We deeply loved and lost Tira. I had been praying for months that I would not be forced to deeply love and lose my husband, who was so good, so honorable. Our future hinged on the approaching hearing, and the anticipation was paralyzing. How could God allow Tira to die when I desperately needed her? As I answered that question, a powerful idea surfaced. Maybe Tiramisu's death meant we no longer needed a pick-me-up. The impression took me by force. It felt so right. My soul soared with hope that life was about to straighten out. I vowed not to go gently into the night. Tira fought until the end, and we would too. Paul's innocence was worth defending, heart and soul. With the critical hearing approaching, I held on to the desperate hope that Tira's death symbolized my husband's upcoming acquittal from these harrowing lies, that the truth would be revealed, and that it would set us free.